Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton. Welcome to show number 86. And on today's podcast, we are going to discuss abstainers versus moderators. Alrighty then, so abstainers versus moderators. This is a concept I've talked about before. You're probably very familiar with it. Gretchen Rubin talks about it in her book. I'll put a link to the book in the notes so you can read it. It's really helpful and useful. I wanted to go into a little bit of nuance about abstainers versus moderators because keto people are very into the concept of abstainers versus moderators for good reason, right? Because we tend to take the abstaining approach. And Gretchen herself is a low carb person, and she is also an abstainer. So, it all fits together. So, a little background, I was actually a personality psych major in college, and I did a lot of work in the personality psych area. And so abstainers versus moderators remind me a lot. Well, they are. I mean, they're a way to look at personality, right? Are you an abstainer personality or a moderator personality? But there are all sorts of personality traits that all work together and apart and against each other. And so, we aren't all just one thing. And what is true of sort of the lay audience, people who aren't into the study of said topic, they tend to think of personality traits as fixed and extreme, right? Like you're either an extrovert or you're an introvert, right? You're either far on this spectrum or you're far on that spectrum. And then it's like black and white. But the reality is all of these exist on a spectrum. We are maybe a little more this way, a little more that way, a little more this way, right? But it's not as clear-cut a identity as it might seem when you start diving into it. Because recently I started thinking, while I still have abstainer traits. Now, when I started keto, I was very, very, very into the abstainer concept. It worked for me and it totally helped. Over the years, I have drifted into feeling more of a moderator, but still an abstainer. But whereas before moderator just was very, very distant, it's now a little closer. So I came to you guys to talk about this, abstainers and moderators, because it's so popular as a concept when people are talking about abstaining. So let me go into it a little bit, sort of at the extremes. Abstainers choose not to do something or not to eat something because when they do so, it opens the door to behaviors they don't like. So you could look at any addict, right, as someone who is an abstainer within their addiction. Now, one thing to think about, we are subject specific, right? So you might be an abstainer in terms of the food you choose, but you're not an abstainer in every place in your life, right? You're not like, oh no, I can't do that. Oh no, I can't do that. Oh no, I can't do that because I am an abstainer. No, it's that in the areas where you are easily triggered to act in ways you do not like, you find it safer to abstain from those behaviors. A moderator is someone who, in areas of their life, makes choices that include rather than exclude. So they're somebody who says, when I overly restrict a thing, it tends to blow back on me. So if I just say like, no, I can never, ever again have a insert food here, I will think about that food and want that food and crave that food like until I break. And maybe I have a lot more of that food than I would have if I had had that food when I first wanted that food. So a moderator is someone who feels that their life is more manageable when they include the things that they like. And an abstainer is someone who feels their life is more manageable when they exclude those things. I mean, that's the best way I think of it. So the question comes up when people are looking at how they eat. And I think it's a good thing to revisit as a concept. And then I also want to draw some distinctions that are a little different. Like recently, I've had some conversations with people around, they've reached their goal weight. Maybe they are planning to eat more things. Maybe they've expanded their diet. Maybe they've, started eating more carbs. Maybe they're planning to eat Aunt Addie's pie at Christmas, the one with the sprinkles that they really like. So if you've been an abstainer and you're suddenly like, I think I'm going to totally do it differently now because I hear being a moderator is better and I want to be a moderator because it's better and I want to eat all these things. If you are looking forward to the eating of the things that you used to not eat with sort of a giddy anticipation and a plan to what I would call have a binge, I would question if you shouldn't still be an abstainer. Why do I say that? Well, think of the word moderate, right? Now, I'm not saying a moderator never overeats or never has a feast day or never goes a little bit ham on some ham at Thanksgiving, but I am saying that those of us that have had binge eating issues know what a binge looks like. So if you're listening to my voice right now and you have ever had what you call a binge, what is a binge by your definition, I want you to be cautious if you ever plan to act in a way that looks a lot like a binge. Just wanted to put that out there because I think that this is actually the crux of a lot of the discussion around abstainers versus moderators. A moderator has better outcomes in terms of their long-term eating success, whatever they define success as, when they moderate their food. An abstainer is someone who has worse long-term outcomes when they don't abstain. So if you are someone who has found a lot of success in the abstainer category, I would like to caution you about switching camps rapidly. That being said, there are many of us that learn over time there is that continuum. It's not an either or. And so we might find that we can moderate certain things, right? So whereas I don't moderate junk food well, and to be perfectly honest, I don't believe anyone does because they're designed not to be moderated. It's sort of like saying I can moderate my crack cocaine intake. Some people can do it, but not as many as you think. But I can moderate things like vegetables, fruits in a way that actually I couldn't. I mean, I really couldn't several years ago. Like if I let myself have those things, I love them and I wanted more and more. And I felt like it was challenging for me and caused me issues. And let's be totally honest. Everyone is a bit of an abstainer and a bit of a moderator. Moderators don't eat everything all the time because that's not a moderator, right? So they'll be like, I'll say it. My dad is a moderator, but he gets on the scale several times a week. And if he finds the scale has gone up, there are certain types of foods that he's like, I'm going to cut those foods out until I like the number on the scale again. So he has a management strategy. Now, he doesn't cut out all carbohydrates completely, but he probably won't have a piece of bread with dinner, bread and butter or whatever. Or he will only have one glass of wine. So he's not never having wine. But I remember as a kid, he was like, the weight's coming on. I don't need the wine. So I'm going to cut the wine consumption back. He likes to have a glass of wine with dinner. So he would make an educated choice about which thing he could remove. And so moderators aren't just lucky people who can binge eat. I think abstainers sometimes think that normal eating is binge eating. It's not. I've learned it's not. It's crazy, but true. And so often moderators are people that have other methods of control, right? They might eat all the foods, but they don't eat all the foods. Or they don't like a lot of these foods. Or gosh, when I eat really heavy things with a lot of cream in them, I don't feel well, so I don't tend to eat those things, right? There are other mechanisms at play in them that help them moderate, help them restrict, help them control what they're eating. They might track their macros. They might do all sorts of things. So I think sometimes we don't get a good picture of what the other camp really looks like. To a moderator, an abstainer looks insane that we would cut out a bunch of things because we could just have less of them. Whereas to an abstainer, a moderator looks crazy because we couldn't leave that half of a cookie on our plate when we were full. Because if it's there, we have to eat it, right? And again, it is a continuum. And at different times in our lives, under different circumstances, in different experiences, we might drift on the continuum. But I do think, just like in personality psych, even if we drift on a continuum, we still have kind of a little bit of a hook in us in our point of origin, right? So I believe that someone who is an abstainer will always kind of have abstainer qualities or thoughts or ways in which being an abstainer is of benefit for them, but they may shift how they define abstainer, right? They might shift slightly towards a moderator. A moderator may over time find that in more stressful situations, they suddenly are a little more out of control with something that they used to be able to control. And now they have to shift a little bit more towards an abstainer because that thing isn't working for them. Right? I was recently eating dinner with my extended family, so I have all these stories, right? Another member of my extended family recently had to give up chocolate. And it wasn't that, they were having binge eating problems from eating chocolate. It was they were getting a headache, right? So there was an outcome they didn't like, so they had to eliminate a food. They're abstaining from that food because the outcome was one they didn't like, right? If you're abstaining from chocolate because when you eat chocolate, suddenly the door is open and it's a eating bonanza, it's a different cause, but, they're related, right? If you don't like the outcome and you have to shift the action, is it better for you to abstain or is it better for you to moderate? And that's all of this question. I would like to also say that while I have conversational education in this field, I definitely recommend reading the book because this is just my interpretation of abstainers and moderators, and there might be something for you in there that you find helpful or useful. So as you're looking at whether you're an abstainer or a moderator, I think this concept is only helpful if it's helpful, as is true of many concepts. So when you're looking at your actions and how to make your life easier and work better, knowing whether it's better for you not to start something because you won't be able to stop is very helpful for a lot of us. And for a lot of us keto people, that's been just sort of a blessing to be able to say, you know what, I shouldn't even have one bite. And as I've told you guys many times, my first several years of keto, that was me. If I had one bite, it was just going to go down the tubes. And while I've shifted, I still live in abstainer most of the time. And I allow myself to expand my definition into the gray area because I stay sane there, right? I stay in control there. I have learned maybe other methods of control. If I open up this door, I close that door, right? If I'm eating more vegetables, I'm still tracking my macros. If I'm, eating more protein, I might eat less fat. I'm making choices. I'm staying conscious. Does that mean I don't have a meal where I'm like, I don't exactly know what was in that because I went to a restaurant and I'm not sure? And sure, I did that this weekend with my family. I was like, I can't accurately track this meal because I don't know exactly what was in that sauce in terms of like how much butter they used to cook that thing. But I did still track it in that I knew about how much chicken I had. I had a lovely roast chicken and likely how much was in what and things. And so I still tracked it to get a ballpark figure. Am I sure that I'm correct in my tracking? Absolutely not. But what I point this out to say is we all need methods of control in terms of our eating that, shockingly to those of us who grew up binge eaters, binge eating is not normal. And being a moderator does not mean eating all the things all the time, anything you want. And so when we start to find ourselves drifting from one camp into the gray area, that's usually because we've expanded our methods of control into other areas than simply abstaining. Abstaining is a very powerful method of control. It's not the only one. So I wanted to talk about this concept, thought it might be helpful for some people. Read the book. It's very good. And I find the more you know about yourself and the more you understand about the way you act, the better you will be long-term at having the kind of life you desire. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a fabulous week, and I hope to see you again 1 week from now.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.